If they asked me, I could write a book about the way you walk and whisper and look.
Great to welcome to our Book Talk segment, author of a really interesting and a very important book. It's called Triumph of the Heart, Forgiveness in an Unforgiving World. We're joined today by award-winning journalist Megan Feldman Bettencourt today, and I believe she's up out in Denver today. Is that right, Megan? Out in Denver, Colorado?
That's right, Doug. I am Denver, Colorado.
I know you went to school in New York, but you wound up in Denver, so that's a totally different type of city than New York.
I did, yes. Yes, I'm a western mountain kind of girl. I grew up in New Mexico, so I do like the wide open spaces out here.
Yeah, I visited that part of the country. It's a nice place to live. That's why I left New York. I like Florida as opposed to New York's great, but I like Florida, and you found a place out there, so that's good. Well, let's talk about the book a bit. And again, we always hear the term, forgiveness, and not an easy thing to do in many cases. But first of all, what kind of gave you the idea to write about it? I know you went through some personal issues in your life, just reading the notes and the book. Is that what kind of led you to writing a whole book about it?
Yes. Well, it's funny because I never imagined myself writing about this topic. I've always been more of a grudge holder by nature and was never especially interested in forgiveness. But I came to profile this man named Azim Khamisa, and Azim had forgiven the killer of his son. And not only did he forgive him, he actually reached out to this man's family, and they became close friends, and they started a violence prevention organization for at-risk youth in San Diego and across the country. And I was really blown away by it. And at the time I did that story, I was struggling in my personal life and my professional life. I was complaining and frustrated about money. I had just been through yet another breakup. And so when I met him, and he seemed so fulfilled, like truly fulfilled, and had forgiven this person, I had to know more.
Yeah, when you read the story like that, and you have several in the book like that, of people that have had terrible things happen to them and by other people, and they were able to forgive them. I don't know how people do it when things like that happen. After reading your book and even you writing the book, do you see how they did it? I still don't.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a reason why I spent a couple of years, profiling people in all kinds of different circumstances, from the less dramatic to the more dramatic, but because it is complex. But I did notice some similarities, and then obviously doing some looking into the scientific research, discovered some things, and one is that the people who are good at forgiving are also good at grieving, which I found really interesting. Because I always thought that if you forgive, that means maybe you shouldn't be angry or you're not upset. And that wasn't the case, really. People who forgave everything from, marital spats or insults to bullying and to the more extreme, even genocide in Rwanda, they really allowed themselves to feel whatever they felt at any given time, and they allowed themselves time to grieve, and they may have set the intention to forgive immediately after the offense, because on some level they knew what science bears out, which is that anger and resentment over time are really unhealthy and damaging. But it took them time, and they, on some level, were patient with themselves with that process.
Yeah, anger and bitterness, like you said, internally for too long, it does damage the person, and obviously you try and somehow move on and certain things seem to be unforgivable, but I guess you can find a way, maybe not to forgive, but to move on. I guess maybe that's the case in some of these situations, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting about it is that I realized through reporting and researching the book that I really didn't know what forgiveness meant before this, and I think a lot of us confuse the word with things like excuse or condone. I used to think if you forgave, that meant you had to be buddy-buddy with someone or reconcile. And it actually doesn't. The Merriam-Webster's definition is to give up resentment. And so, a lot of the people in my book, some forgave and reconciled with this person, and others did not reconcile, but they were able to forgive and give up that bitterness.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk in the book how forgiveness, and maybe on a level where the offense isn't quite as bad, but it does help your mood, right? You get more optimistic. Actually, some health benefits too, right? As far as heart attacks go and holding grudges.
Exactly. So there's multiple studies that have been done over the last 20 years or so that show that forgiveness can actually put you much less at risk for depression and anxiety. It can alleviate those conditions, and that's because every time you think about a grudge or someone you're angry at, you have that stress response, and the adrenaline and the other neurotransmitters that flood your brain actually over time erode your ability to problem solve, and they do make you depressed. So it can reverse those conditions, and it also is actually good for heart health because whereas rage, and even repressed anger has been linked to increased risk of heart attack. The opposite is true with people who forgive.
When you decided to write a book, Triumph of the Heart, about the topic of forgiveness, how do you kind of put that together? You mentioned the people that you wrote about. How did you find them? And I guess they were receptive. Were most people receptive to the idea when you approached them?
Yeah, so I really, from the outset, I really wanted to know how this worked and what it looked like in a whole range of different situations. So I knew that I wanted to look at the individual level and the interpersonal, everything from the role of forgiveness in marriage and intimate relationships to the role of forgiving parents, and how people do that. But then I also wanted to look at the collective implications and, questions like, well, how do we facilitate the seeking and granting of forgiveness in communities like schools, for example. And so when I set out to do the research, I just started looking and kind of following my nose about what I was most curious about, and that ended up taking me to a number of states, and also in the most extreme example, which is about forgiveness after genocide, and is that possible? It took me to Rwanda for a month.
Yeah, on maybe a lesser level, obviously a lesser level, but you talk about when politicians do something or public figures do something, and they ask the public for forgiveness. Sometimes it seems kind of phony, but I guess at other times, if they show real remorse, America is a pretty forgiving country. I guess people in general are pretty forgiving if somebody shows real honesty when they're asking for that, right?
Yeah, and that's the key thing, is actually showing remorse and then showing that you've changed and that you're not repeating the behavior. Because what people don't like is these kind of fake apologies, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you were upset by that,"
right?
Which really doesn't mean taking responsibility for anything. And people also don't like when you or a public figure or anyone else apologizes and then proceeds to continue the same behavior, right?
Yeah. Those, you hear a lot of those now. If you are offended, I apologize. That's a qualified apology.
Yeah.
It doesn't count.
Right.
How has it helped your own life, Megan? I'm sorry, I would say your own life, because you said you went through some things before you wrote the book. Has it helped you?
Yeah, it has. I would say, I don't think I'm ever going to be one of those people who forgives so easily. We know from the research that optimists tend to forgive more readily, and I am naturally a pessimist, although I've been working on that for a long time, and I've come a long way. But I would say, I collected forgiveness techniques as I went, and as I spoke with people and looked at the research, and I have been using them, and I would say that just practicing compassion for myself and other people on a daily basis and just noticing, when I'm reacting in anger, and just noticing it and trying not to judge myself, and then letting it go. That seems to really help.
Yeah, I think that's the key, letting it go eventually. It may take a while, take longer for some people than others too, right? Don't feel bad if it takes a longer time, but eventually you have to let it go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's a really fascinating book. I enjoyed reading through it. Again, it's called Triumph of the Heart. I'm sure our audience will as well. Do you have a website, Megan, you want to direct people to? They can contact you or get the book?
I do. It's www.meganfeldman.com/book/.
Great. And we also put a listing on a link on our website for people to get it as well. But Megan, really appreciate you taking the time. Good luck with the book, and hopefully we can talk to you again when your next project comes out. But thanks for joining us.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
If you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at DougMilesMedia.com. This has been a presentation of Doug Miles Media, all rights reserved. You can listen to or download previous programs at iTunes, Stitcher.com, or Doug Miles Media.